Does the term neurodivergence mean anything to you? Or have you just simply heard it and been wondering, does this strange term mean? Well, this is why we have shows like 10 Minutes with Nick. Hi, I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. And today we're going to talk about neurodivergence and why I'm sort of concerned by the popularity of the term on social media. Now, my understanding of neurodivergence until 30 minutes ago was that neurodivergence was a catch-all term for various hosts of mental illnesses. So various things, and to have a mental illness, one must be diagnosed by a doctor, right? You can't, like if you are sad, it is unwise for you to simply say to yourself, well, I have depression. I don't recommend that, because that can lead you to both misdiagnose, and once you've misdiagnosed, then misprescribe solutions, or, go seek out answers when you don't really know yet. There's a reason we have doctors who specialize in these sorts of things. What I learned a few minutes ago is that neurodivergence is actually not a medical term. Neurodivergence is simply, and I quote from the Cleveland Clinic, neurodivergence is people whose brain differences affect how their brains work. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that's just people. I'm going to say it again for the people in the back. Neurodivergence is a non-medical catch-all term that just means that people's brains develop differently. In fact, the term neurodivergence, according again to the Cleveland Clinic, was coined in 1998 by Judy Singer, an Australian sociologist, who used the term to recognize that everyone's brains develop in a unique way. Congratulations. That means everyone's brains develop in a unique way. You are a unique person. You are a unique mixture of your mother's and father's DNA strands that created you. And that doesn't mean things are consistent from your parents to you. It means you are a whole new person developed from that genetic material. Again, I'm not going to get into how the genetic material got into each other. We don't need to discuss it. This is not that type of podcast. Stop asking me to do it. I won't. So neurodivergence is more of a sociological term than it is a medical term. Now, certainly neurodivergence, since it encompasses all the differences in which different ways in which brains develop, it does in fact encompass mental illnesses. It encompasses things like autism spectrum disorder, which I know used to be called autism, and people are going to, be weirded out by me saying autism spectrum disorder. But we've learned since the 1950s that, in fact, there is a spectrum of mental illnesses that fall under the autism spectrum. And sidebar, I know I've said mental illness a couple of times. I don't know if this is a whole movement. I saw this somewhere once. People are afraid to call things affecting the brain mental illnesses. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if your brain working differently is one thing. Like, some people are really good at mental math and some people are not good at mental math. That's your brain working differently. If your brain is working incorrectly, like just say you have bipolar disorder, let's say that. If you have bipolar disorder, I would submit your brain is not functioning correctly, because the human brain is supposed to have at its base an evolutionary drive for survival. People with bipolar disorder often do not share that evolutionary drive. That is an incorrect functioning of the brain requiring the intervention of a doctor. Now, that's why I say mental illness, because mental illness is truly something that needs to be taken care of. A mental difference may not be. Why do I say this? Well, and maybe this is just a concern of mine as opposed to an actual problem. But the popularity of terms such as neurodivergent and neurospicy on social media, much like the popularity of any other term on social media, has grown into sort of a movement onto itself. Accounts that are quote-unquote neurodivergent or neurospicy, as the term people like to use, and I hope I'm using neurospicy right, because if I'm not, then I'm accidentally becoming the podcast I never intended to be. If you are neurodivergent, it's sort of become an easy way to be popular. And people are using it to describe anything. Like, I don't like to go to crowds, for example. Okay. Lots of people don't like big crowds. It does not mean that something is wrong with your brain. It does not mean that. But it's almost becoming popular to have the sort of complaint of, oh man, I hate being in crowds. And they're developing sort of, and the issue with that is that when you start to develop these ideas as popular, that this is not only a common thing, but something that just needs to be accepted, then society has to sort of kowtow and bow to that. Now, don't get me wrong. Massive parties should not be on anyone's go-to list. I have no desire to go into a club. I just don't. At the same token, that seems to be where all the cool, hip, young kids hang out. Again, that may be true, it may not be true. It's my impression of society. I may not even post this one, because this seems like a loaded topic that needs a couple experts in to talk about. But when you run through these ideas, and as you start to see the popularity of these neurodivergent accounts, well, it is people using the idea of mental illness as a hook for their own internet clout. That I don't like. I'm not about that. If you are, if you're struggling, I get it, right? There's plenty of like ADHD accounts and ADD accounts on the internet. I don't know that they all have ADD or ADHD. I'm not a doctor, not diagnosing anyone. I think it's odd to use a non-medical term, use it to imply that you have something medical, and then use that for clout. It doesn't sit well with me when people do that. It's a little bit like, it feels like the usage of anxiety. Like, everybody and their brother nowadays has anxiety. If you don't have anxiety, you almost start to get anxiety about the fact that you don't have anxiety. Like, why am I not as anxious as everybody else? What the hell's wrong with me? I don't know. I think in the reality, what we come to is that because social media requires you to live your life in 30-second or 40-second or, a minute-long sound bites, people have to find ways to crack that market. And what's a good way to crack that market? Well, you find a niche. And what's a market niche? Well, it's something that you can speak to authoritatively or appear to speak to authoritatively, and a group who you can get to identify with you. What's an easy niche? Take a bunch of people who have anxiety and say, hey, I get you, brother. I'm anxious too. Yeah. And of course, if you're pretty or you're good looking or whatever, it makes it even easier. Long way to say, if you have a mental illness, speak up, but don't necessarily just go and spew your mouth on the internet. Talk to a doctor. Let the doctor help you. They know what they're doing, or at least some of them do. You do have to shop around and find a doctor who's going to help you with your specific issue. But that goes back to my conversation on being medically informed. Using the internet is only going to One, perpetuate myths about the neurodivergent as either a fragile group or as a group of people with like superpowers. That's not helpful either. And two, don't use mental illness for clout. Just don't. Anyways, that was 10 and a half minutes. I'm out of time. We'll see if this actually makes it onto the podcast. But I'm Nick. This was 10 Minutes with Nick. Have a good night.